The sun was dropping low behind the Sawtooth Ridge when he first saw her coming up the long dirt road, dust curling around her skirts like a hesitant ghost. Caleb Rourke leaned against the corral fence with a weight in his chest he never spoke of. The ranch had been quiet since his father died, quieter since God had gone silent on him too, or maybe since he had stopped listening. Either way, the land felt hollow, cattle moved slow, wind whispered through dry grass, and a man could forget how to pray when all he heard back was emptiness. She did not ride like the women he remembered from town. No nervous pull on the reins, no fear in her eyes. She rode steady, back straight, hat pulled low, a plain dress and boots worn but cared for. When she reached the gate, she did not call out his name, did not wave. She simply waited, hands folded, eyes calm, like she knew patience the way ranchers knew drought. Caleb pushed off the fence and opened the gate, dust settling between them, evening light turning her hair the color of wheat. She said her name was Eliza Moore, her voice soft but sure, and she said she had come because Pastor Whitcomb thought Caleb might need company, maybe help, maybe a reminder. Caleb almost laughed at that. Reminders were things the past handled just fine. Yet he nodded and led her inside the fence, manners drilled into him deeper than belief ever had been. She thanked him and looked around the ranch as if seeing more than fences and barns. As if she could read the ache stitched into the land, they walked toward the house in silence, boots crunching on gravel, the sky bleeding orange into purple. And Caleb wondered what she saw when she looked at him. A broken rancher, a man with too much anger and not enough hope. Eliza stopped on the porch and turned to him. From the satchel at her side she pulled out a small worn Bible, leather cracked, pages soft. She held it out without ceremony, without expectation, and said only that she thought he might like to have it. Caleb stared at the book like it might bite him. Memories stirred, his mother reading by lamplight, his father praying before storms. Faith once lived in this house like a quiet tenant, then sickness came, then loss, and God had packed his things and left without a word. Caleb shook his head and said he was not much for scripture anymore. Eliza did not argue, did not plead. She simply said that sometimes the book was less about words and more about remembering who you once were. Something in that settled into him. Not belief, not yet, but recognition. He took the Bible. Its weight, surprising, familiar. Eliza smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just a small curve of understanding. As if she knew this was enough for now, they stepped inside the house, dust and shadows giving way to the smell of coffee and old wood, and Caleb felt a strange stirring. Like the first drop of rain after a long dry spell over supper. They spoke of simple things. Cattle prices, weather, the long ride from town. Eliza listened more than she spoke, her eyes steady on him when he talked. Not judging, not fixing, just seeing. Caleb found himself telling her things he had not meant to say. How nights felt too long, how mornings felt heavier than they should. She did not offer scripture, did not quote verses. She nodded, her gaze warm. And in that gaze he felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of being held without hands. Later that night, after Eliza had taken the spare room, Caleb sat alone by the table, the Bible resting before him. He did not open it. Instead, he thought of her eyes, clear as creek water, reflecting something steady and kind. Maybe faith did not always come thunderous and loud. Maybe sometimes it arrived quiet, riding up a dusty road at sundown. Carried not in sermons but in the simple grace of a woman who believed enough for two. Morning came slow over the Rourke ranch, light spilling gentle across the floorboards like it was afraid to wake old ghosts. Caleb rose before the rooster, a habit etched by years of duty, yet this morning felt different, heavier and lighter all at once. Eliza was already awake, sitting at the table with the Bible open before her, not reading aloud, not making a show of it, just resting her hands on the pages, as if drawing warmth from them. Caleb paused in the doorway, watching her, something tightening in his chest, because it had been a long time since anyone treated faith like a companion instead of a weapon. She looked up and smiled, not startled, as if she had known he would be there, and asked if he wanted coffee. The word want caught him off guard. Nobody asked him that anymore. They usually told him what was needed. Cattle fed, fences mended, grief endured. He nodded and sat, the Bible between them like a bridge neither had to cross, yet days settled into a rhythm that surprised him. Eliza helped with chores without complaint, hands blistering, dress dusty. She laughed easy when a calf slipped the fence, and she listened when Caleb spoke of his father, his mother, the night the prayers stopped working. he found himself talking more than he meant to, words spilling like water from a cracked trough, and Eliza never interrupted, never rushed him toward forgiveness or scripture. She spoke of her own losses instead, a brother buried young, a mother whose faith never wavered even when her body did. She said belief was not about certainty, but about choosing hope again and again, even when it felt foolish. Caleb scoffed once, sharp and bitter, saying hope had a habit of leaving men stranded. Eliza only met his gaze and said sometimes hope stayed. It just looked different than we expected. Her eyes held no challenge, only quiet conviction, and Caleb found that harder to fight than any sermon. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast, dark clouds piling over the ridge like a judgment, long delayed. Thunder cracked, cattle scattered, and Caleb rode hard, shouting into the wind, fear rising unbidden. Storms still carried his father's last moments, fevered prayers, unanswered pleas. Rain stung his face like accusation, and when lightning split the sky he cursed God aloud, words torn from his throat, raw and furious. Later, soaked and shaking, he returned to the house to find Eliza waiting, lantern lit, worry plain on her face. She wrapped him in a blanket without asking, hands firm, grounding, and he broke then, not with tears but with anger spilling hot and relentless. He told her God was cruel, absent, a lie men told themselves to survive. Eliza listened, eyes shining but steady, and when he finished, she said quietly that faith was not pretending storms did not hurt. It was trusting you were not alone in them, even when it felt like you were screaming into nothing. Her voice trembled just enough to show she understood the scream. That night Caleb opened the Bible for the first time, not searching for comfort, not even meaning to read, just turning pages. His father's handwriting marked the margins, old notes about mercy, about endurance, about love being stronger than fear. The words felt foreign and familiar, like a song remembered only in fragments. Eliza sat nearby sewing, humming low, not watching him, giving him space to wrestle. And as he read, he realized the ache in his chest was not anger alone but longing, a hunger for something steady, something that would not rot or die or leave him alone with his bitterness. He looked up and met Eliza's eyes, and in them he saw no judgment for his doubt, only faith big enough to hold it. Something inside him shifted, not belief yet, but a willingness to hope. Weeks passed, and town talk followed as it always did. Whispers about the woman staying with the broken rancher, about impropriety and intentions. Caleb bristled at first, ready to run her off to protect her name. But Eliza surprised him by saying truth had a way of standing on its own. She continued going into town for supplies, chin high, Bible tucked under her arm, not to prove anything but because it was part of her. Caleb watched her from a distance one Sunday as she sat in the small wooden church, light through stained glass coloring her face. He did not enter, stayed by the door, listening to hymns drift out, something tightening again in his chest, not pain this time but yearning. When she emerged, she did not ask why he had not come in. She only smiled and walked beside him back to the horse. Her presence beside him felt like an invitation without pressure. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky burn red, Caleb asked her why she stayed, why she gave her time and care to a man who argued with God and barely slept through the night. Eliza thought a long moment before answering, then said she believed people were not meant to walk their hardest roads alone, that sometimes God worked through hands and eyes instead of miracles, and that loving someone did not require fixing them, only walking beside them while they found their way. Her words settled deep, because for the first time Caleb considered that faith might not be about rules or certainty, but about relationship, about presence. He realized then that when he felt calm, when the nights seemed less heavy, it was often because Eliza was there, reading by lamplight, humming softly. Her faith steady enough to lean on. The change in him was subtle but real. He prayed once, not on his knees, not with practiced words, but standing in the barn at dawn, dust motes floating like quiet witnesses. He said nothing more than "help me understand." And for the first time the silence did not feel empty. It felt patient, waiting. He did not tell Eliza about it, did not want to cheapen it, but she seemed to know, meeting his eyes that evening with a softness that felt like encouragement, not triumph. They worked side by side mending fences, hands brushing, a spark that startled him, because it carried both tenderness and fear. He realized how deeply she had come to matter, not just as a guide back toward faith, but as a woman whose presence had changed the shape of his days. Yet fear lingered, because belief once lost did not return without scars, and love carried its own risks. Caleb lay awake, nights staring at the ceiling, Bible resting on his chest, wondering if faith found through another person could survive when tested, wondering if he was strong enough to believe for himself. Eliza lay awake too, though he did not know it yet, praying not for his conversion but for his peace, both of them standing on the edge of something fragile and powerful, not yet named, as the ranch breathed around them. Wind through grass, stars overhead, waiting to see if faith planted in quiet moments and steady eyes could grow roots deep enough to last. The test came the way it always did on the frontier, sudden and unforgiving. Drought tightened its grip on the land, grass crisped beneath the sun, waterholes shrank to muddy scars, and Caleb watched his cattle grow lean, each day a reminder that faith alone did not fill troughs. The bankman rode out with polite words and hard eyes, notes overdue, patience thin, and Caleb felt the old anger stir, that familiar urge to curse heaven and turn his back on hope. Eliza stood beside him during those days, quieter now, sensing the weight he carried. She read from the Bible some evenings but never pushed it toward him, never insisted he listen, because she knew this battle was his to fight, not hers to win for him. Caleb found himself praying again, not because it felt good, but because it felt honest, raw words spoken into the heat and dust, asking not for rescue but for strength, wondering if faith could stand when the eyes that had first reflected it back to him stepped aside, when the well ran dry on the south pasture and a prized steer collapsed. Caleb broke again, this time in silence, fists clenched, breath shallow. Eliza found him in the barn at dusk, dust hanging thick in the air, and she did something unexpected. She placed the Bible in his hands and stepped back, far enough that he could not reach her, and said softly that whatever he found now had to come from within, not from her presence, not from her belief, but from his own choice to trust or turn away. The words cut deeper than any rebuke, because they forced him to face the truth, that he had leaned on her eyes, her calm, her faith, instead of learning to see for himself. Caleb stood there long after she left, Bible heavy in his hands, and for the first time he read not to remember the past or to feel close to her, but to seek something for himself, something solid enough to hold him when everything else stripped. Away days later, Eliza announced she would be leaving soon. Her task finished, she said, though her voice betrayed the cost of those words. Caleb felt panic claw at his chest, the thought of the house empty again, of silence without her footsteps or humming, terrified him more than drought or debt. He wanted to ask her to stay, to plead, but something stopped him, a quiet understanding that if he bound her to him out of fear, faith would wither into dependence. Instead, he told her he understood, even as his heart rebelled. That night they sat together by the fire, closer than ever yet carefully apart, sharing stories and laughter and long pauses heavy with what remained unsaid. And Caleb realized love, like faith, required courage, not grasping, but trusting what had been planted would survive the seasons ahead. The morning Eliza left dawned clear and cool, a rare mercy. Caleb saddled her horse in silence, hands steady despite the storm inside him. She thanked him for his kindness, for allowing her to walk beside him, and he surprised himself by thanking her, not for bringing the Bible, but for believing he was worth believing in. Her eyes shone then, not with tears but with pride. She said faith was not something she had given him, only something she had reflected until he could see it himself. They stood a moment longer, the space between them charged, and when she rode away, dust rising behind her, Caleb did not feel abandoned, he felt tested, like a man standing on his own feet. For the first time the days that followed were quiet but not empty. Caleb worked the land with renewed steadiness, sought advice from neighboring ranchers, made hard decisions, sold cattle he loved to save the rest, and through it all he prayed, not always with confidence, sometimes with frustration and doubt, but always with honesty. The drought did not break overnight, miracles did not rain from the sky, yet something within him held, a calm born not of certainty but of trust. He read the Bible at night, finding meaning not in promises of ease but in reminders of endurance, and often he thought of Eliza, not as a crutch but as a blessing that had pointed him toward something greater. One evening as he knelt by the creek bed, dry and cracked, Caleb felt a peace settle over him, quiet and unassuming, not tied to outcomes or relief, just the assurance that he was not alone in the struggle. That faith did not guarantee rescue but offered companionship through hardship. He realized then that what he felt for Eliza was love, real and deep, but no longer tangled with desperation. It was a love that could wait, that could honor her journey as well as his own. And in that clarity he found gratitude instead of longing, hope instead of fear. Months later, rain finally came. Not a flood, not a miracle, but a steady soaking that darkened the earth and filled the air with the scent of renewal. Caleb stood in it, bareheaded, water running down his face like baptism, laughter breaking free. He did not shout thanks, did not bargain or plead. He simply received it, understanding at last that faith was not about earning grace, but recognizing it when it arrived. And in that moment he saw Eliza's eyes in his memory, not because he needed them to believe, but because they had once reflected a truth he now carried within himself. When Eliza returned the following spring, riding up the same dusty road, Caleb met her at the gate, not as a man searching for faith, but as one who had found it and chosen it daily. He welcomed her with a smile born of peace, not need, and when she looked at him she saw it at once. The change she had hoped for but never tried to force. He held out the Bible, worn further now, and said he had finally learned how to read it, not just with his eyes but with his life. Eliza's smile was soft and knowing, and together they stepped forward, not into certainty, but into a shared journey, rooted in faith that no longer depended on reflection alone.